We have a lot to cover in the next 90 minutes, so I'll dive right in. This session is split up into 4 parts. As you can see here, we have several presenters and panelists, and I'm going to present the first 2 segments. Let's start with the film model. This builds on versions of an Excel-based film model, which I've been working on over the years, many years actually, including recent iterations for producer clients. As those of you who may have attended last year might have heard me say something similar. This year it's actually the 27th anniversary edition. I presented the first version of this at the very first IMAX Theater Managers Seminar in '89 when I used to work at IMAX. That was a seminar series. Funny thing is, even though the market has changed and 27 years have passed, some realities of film funding haven't changed a whole lot, like the need for non-equity funding and the challenge for a producer to earn an economic return on their investment. Now, before I go further, a few caveats. The scenarios I'm about to show are not any particular film in disguise, I promise you. There are many, many possible permutations of these scenarios. I'm only going to show 4 in the interest of time and just to highlight some concepts. The P&L scenarios, well, whose P&L is it? Well, I'm doing this from the perspective of the producer or the owner of the film that doesn't have its distribution business. So, of course, if it was a producer with a distribution function, it would be a different set of economics, and hence the reason why I'm not showing 15 permutations today. I updated a version of the model. Again, it's an Excel program for this session, and I used it to create several different scenarios for a new giant screen film. When I did it last year, I actually worked with the Excel spreadsheet in real time, and legibility was an issue. So I won't do that this year. I won't do that to you. So instead, just trust that I used my engine, and I iterated a few scenarios. I'm going to show you some highlights from changing assumptions a little bit. So let's walk through a few of the key assumptions. First off, again, I want to emphasize that when I use the word producer, what I really mean, I mean the equity investors. Maybe one, it may be several. The film's owners. Now, it could be that the film production company is also the owner or an owner, but again, I just want to emphasize I'm talking about the film owners. All right, so there's a lot of inputs, a lot of assumptions you can make, and this isn't all of them in my model, but these are perhaps the more important ones. The number of theaters. So the universe of giant screen theaters, unfortunately it's not growing, it's actually slightly declining. The installed base of theaters that would play giant screen documentaries on a regular basis, not including destination theaters, is somewhere north of 200. It could be 220, it's hard to know exactly. And so the range, if you're modeling a new film, it might be 50, it could be 200 plus. In terms of the average license per giant screen theater, again, if you're modeling the entire experience of a film over its its life, you might end up with an average of between $30,000 and $50,000 overall on average per license. However, that kind of masks the per transaction reality. You know, a smaller theater might only pay $10,000, and a larger volume theater might pay over $100,000 for their total license fees for that film. Corresponding with that, the percentage of the box office going to the distributor. Now, for the most part, this industry is based on a gate share model, but there are parts of the world where theaters are used to paying a fixed sum. But I'm using the percentage approach here because it's the most popular. Overall, the average might be between 18 and 25%. However, again, on a per transaction basis, it might be as low as 12%, and it might be as high as 35%. And before those of you paying 30% jump on your distributors to try to get that 12%, know that the 12% usually goes with the very high volume theater, and they may have some special circumstances in their market, like they're the only one or something like that. And the flip side of that, those paying the 25, 30% rates are probably small volume theaters with a low average ticket. The film production budget, this is all over the map. This is quite a range. It could be $2.5 million, it could be 10 million, it could be more than 10 million, it could even be less than 2.5 million. So it's quite a range. The distribution fee, now again, remember I'm doing this P&L on the basis of a producer that doesn't have its own distribution wing. So the distribution fee, now look at this, 10 to 30%. Now that represents the range of what I know, what I've heard. The 10% is not very common. I would say, the majority of distributors who are in the business of distributing for other clients, for producer clients, are probably in the 25% range. Distribution marketing, well, that's another one that's kind of, as you can see, there's a big range. $250,000, maybe that's the floor, maybe it's less, to all the way north of $2 million, maybe it's up to $3 million, depending on the film circumstances. The distribution MG, or minimum guarantee, well, that's not as prevalent or as easy to get these days. In fact, a lot of distributors would argue that their healthy investment in the distribution marketing is in effect their minimum guarantee. But it's in my model, and it could be zero, and that's perhaps more likely the case these days, or it could be $500,000 or more. And then finally, ancillaries. This is a business that hasn't really enjoyed a lot of ancillaries, things like home video, and now we've got over the top and so on. It might be 0.5% of ultimate revenue, it might be 5%, but it's not much better than that. It could be, and that's an opportunity, and we'll get to that later. So those are some key assumptions. So let's look at our first scenario. So I call this the economic return. And by the way, if anyone wants to get up and move closer to the stream, by all means, I won't be distracted. Go ahead and do that if you like. Hopefully you can see this. So economic, in other words, what does it take for the investors in a film to make their money back, plus a profit, to the point where they feel their investment has been, their investment is, their risk is compensated. So an economic return. I'm assuming that a profit-oriented producer needs to earn a 20% internal rate of return on a pre-tax cash basis. So in other words, I flex the assumptions so that I could just hit the 20% IRR at the bottom. So how could that 20% be achieved? Well, here's the illustration. It's a good film, it's doing pretty well, not an overly large production budget, $6 million, more than half of which is paid by non-equity funding, like grants and sponsorships and so on, and a reasonably good number of theaters lease it. Now, the other thing I should probably mention about other theatrical, non-giant screen theatrical, I won't go on the details here, but it might come from Full Dome, it might come from theme parks. You might do a 12-ish minute 4D cut of your film. That has happened. Also, there is growth in the small and medium-sized flat screens, typically 3D, in smaller museums and science centers and cultural centers around the world. So that's in the other category. And I won't get into the details of how that's calculating, but it is running in the background. Okay, so that's our economic return scenario. And you can see the ultimate box office there is about 33 million, which is a pretty decent number. Okay, so here's one called very high. Some of you in the film distribution business or production business might call this hitting it out of the ballpark. The ultimate box office here is 44 million, 175 leases or theaters leasing. And you can see it delivers an outstanding return to the producer. Almost 5 million in profit over the, by the way, I've also used a roughly 5-year time frame, well 7 years if you include pre-production. And you can see a 32% IRR. Again, this is a really, really great result. Not impossible, but sure isn't easy. By the way, we also assume in this scenario that a larger investment in marketing is required. In fact, some people might think that that's not high enough in order to achieve that kind of ultimate box office. Okay, so let's swing. No. We'll do questions a little later. Thanks. Sorry, James. But thanks for being my test case on the question about questions. All right. So the break even. This is a scenario in which the producer just recoups its investment on a cash basis. So again, I flexed the assumptions to hit just exactly 0% IRR, or you can see $10 basically break even. So this collection of assumptions gets there, 114 licenses, which is still pretty good. But I'm assuming that in the case of a break-even scenario, the film's not hitting that superlative average license fee per theater. It's down around $35,000. It might even be less. But the 114 theaters is still a decent number of giant screen theaters. It's penetrating just over half the installed base worldwide. So that's not bad, actually. Okay, so then one more scenario, and then I will move on to the next section. The premium strategy. So let's imagine a higher cost film, an $8 million film, of which $5 million is the equity, so the gap is going to be sponsorship or grants or something like that. This premium film commands a premium higher than average or higher than the previous scenario's distribution fees on a dollar basis and a percentage basis. The distribution strategy is to focus on better performing giant screen theaters and to distribute theatrically only to giant screen theaters and not all those others that I talked about earlier. And let's assume that you find a distributor that also invests equity, who's also prepared to fund a pretty generous amount on marketing, and is prepared to accept a modest distribution fee. So you can see at the end of this scenario that you get to profitability of about $1 million over 5+ years, but the IRR is only 5%. Now, what are the variables that really move the results? In other words, what about the sensitivity analysis? I could run through 15 or 20 of these, but here are basically it all boils down to this. The number of theaters that license the film and the average license fee are probably the things that move the needle the most. I mean, setting aside that if the amount of non-equity, non-participating money you get up front obviously helps an awful lot to the production. So if I start from the break-even case and I change the number of theaters by 10%, one way or the other, I change the producer's profit by $300,000. Not bad. Similarly, if I change the average license fee by 10%, I change the producer's profit by about $300,000. And if I manage to do both at the same time, going in the same direction, there's some compounding that goes on, and the producer's profit changes by $635,000. So that just about wraps up well, hang on. Before I get to the wrap up on that, let me just say, and we're going to come back to this in the panel discussion, part 4 of this session. So the basic conclusions you can take from this. It's hard to make an economic return. It's not impossible, but it's a challenge. We still need free money, non-equity money, to help make these, usually to make these films work economically. We need to grow the pie, so we need to grow the number of theaters one way or the other, and it's probably not going to happen from giant screen theaters. It's probably going to come from those other theatrical opportunities. And in general, we need to grow the revenue channels. And conventional cinema is going through this, the whole windowing issue. But you'll have to be sympathetic with producers and distributors that want to look at those other ancillary channels like over-the-top, like Netflix and so on. Of course, still, they're going to want to be careful to not intrude on their primary exhibition period with the giant screen theaters. But you'll understand economically, why that's important to them. All right. So, and we'll come back again in segment 4, we'll come back and revisit some of this, and also we'll have some questions about the model when we get to that. So let me move into this next part, which is quantifying what the market wants. I am going to draw on 2 sources of information here. One is a theater programming study that we did about a year ago. And the other is I'm going to make reference to it's a very major study that the GSCA funded. It's a wonderful study. It's a treasure trove of information. It was done in 2014. So the theater programming survey, basically it was to capture the range of attitudes regarding usage and attitudes by theater programmers, theater managers, regarding various types of content that their theaters have programmed now, in the recent past, and also in the pretty near future. We also asked a number of questions to profile them to find out how much they're spending on marketing and programming and the underlying attendance trends for their facility. By the way, I should mention that this was a study. It was really a product of the research task force. I'm a member. I led the design on a pro bono basis. I led the design and analysis of it. I presented a version of this last year. Kelly Germain from the GSCA was a huge help to managing the data for this and creating the slides. Many of the graphs, or all the graphs actually, that are used on these slides. The methodology, it was self-administered online survey with theater managers. Our sample was basically all of the current and some lapsed GSCA theater members. We did it early 2015, and we had about a 37% response rate, which was pretty good. The audience survey, now again, this was a huge undertaking. It was a big commissioned survey. It was done in 2014. It was designed, fielded, analyzed, and reported by the marketing research firm Isurus and the marketing communications agency Friendly Giant Marketing. They worked together. And you can see what the goals were. I won't read them to you. By the way, if you're a member and if you haven't seen it yet, or you're thinking about becoming a member, this is a good reason for doing it. You can download it from the GSCA website, from the members section, if you want to take a look. There's an awful lot of great information there. Here is how it was designed. It was definitely a quantitative survey, so that really good, statistically valid results could come from it. The methodology, there's actually two parts to it. One was an in-person intercepts at giant screen theaters around the world, and the other was a self-administered online survey. You can see the sample frames were, so intercepts were visitors at 36 sites in 12 countries, so there's a really good international composition to this. And the GenPop survey was done online in 12 countries, so again, a really good international sweep to the data. The timing was, I think it was the first half or second quarter of 2014. The total completed surveys, this is a lot of completes, almost 5,200. And I should mention, over 1,500 or almost 60% of the in-person intercepts were respondents who had been to a giant screen documentary in the last 3 months. And of the 36 theaters, about 1/3 of them played Hollywood features as well as documentaries. Okay, so let's swing back to the theater programming survey. And again, this was of theater managers responsible for programming their theaters. As expected, 100% of the respondents show giant screen films. Surprisingly, 1/3 show first-run Hollywood films. Vast majority of those were flat screens. And almost 1/3, as of a year ago, are showing some kind of alternative content. Clearly, giant screen films dominate theater schedules. Amongst 37 theaters on average reported 91% of their schedule was occupied by giant screen documentaries. So even though they may be showing Hollywood, they may be showing alternative content, the fact of the matter is giant screen docs dominate the schedules, not too surprising. Multiplexing of a single screen in the giant screen world, and museums and science centers especially, is a well-entrenched approach to programming. About 1/3 or 32% show 4+, at least 4 titles, different titles each week. And over the sweep of a full year, a majority, almost 6 in 10, show 7 or more films. We asked how important is the availability of 3D version of the film to your booking decision. Obviously, this answer had everything to do with whether or not they were 3D equipped, which meant it's mainly of importance to flat screen theaters. That explains basically the difference in the scores here. Then we asked how satisfied programmers are with the content that they're seeing come to the marketplace. And the satisfaction levels are okay. They're generally averaging about 7 out of 10, but you notice there's some softness in the box office performance area. It's a fairly low top box score. Now, by the way, it's Research Geek for if somebody has a chance to rate something on a scale of 1 to 10, if they check off 8, 9, or 10 out of 10, that's the top box score. So if you look at that 41% number at the top, that means 41% of these respondents checked off either 8, 9, or 10 out of 10. The best top score, as you can see, is on achieving mission goals. So that's a good report card for producers. So from the theater programming survey, this is where we bring in, I'm making reference to the major consumer studies. So we can see the similarities and the differences between what theater programmers are saying and thinking versus what the consumers are interested in. So you can see that there's some similarity. I mean, there's some trends that are, where the top box scores for both the theater manager and the consumer is kind of similar, and I flagged that with the arrows on this slide. Notice in red font, so the top box scores for the programming survey, those are some pretty low scores, but notice how they diverge from what the consumers say they want. The low scores on this slide, I mean, it's basically a categorical. If it's 0, that means absolutely not. And even the 13% is obviously very low. But then look how that compares with some of the consumer scores, which are not as low. In fact, they're, you could say they're reasonably high. So again, the glass is half full way of looking at this is, for producers, maybe there's an opportunity there to deliver a new kind of content that consumers really want. All right. Then we asked. Then the question was asked about the interest in topics. Now, this list. Remember, this is the theater program. The theater programming survey happened after the audience survey of consumers. So we wanted to make sure we asked theater programmers the very same question, the same collection of words, so that we could make good comparisons. So theaters and consumers tend to agree on the most appealing topics. Note the top 5 rows or so. However, consumers are more interested in a greater variety of topics than theater managers, and I kind of alluded to that before. And you can see, especially where the arrows are, where there's some divergence. And again, maybe for the less risk-averse producer out there, this may be an opportunity for you. Then we asked, what's the single most important message you'd like to convey to a giant screen producer? And I won't read it to you. You can see. By the way, I will say this was a completely open-ended question. We didn't actually give people the chance to tick off one of these phrases. It was completely open-ended. And Gina McNeil from ISRIS, pro bono, she went through every one of them and basically coded them and created these different buckets to capture what people were saying. I actually, later on, and you can get it from the GSCA website later, there is actually another slide with literally all the comments. Here are just a few examples of the comments and that are kind of representative of the whole collection of comments. Things like take true advantage of the medium, both picture and sound. Have the audience experience something that they cannot otherwise, and so on. And I'm sure you've heard. You might even recognize your own comment there. These were blind, so nobody's name is attributed to it, and it's probably a sentiment that you can identify with if you're a theater manager or programmer. Then we asked about how much, attendance the theater was achieving in the last full year that was reported, and that was 2014 year. We ended up with now this is an approximation based on people checking off a range, but long story short, it comes out to about 162,000 is the average, based on this survey of about a year ago, per theater. And you can see the distribution of attendance from low to high. Then we asked the question, what's your average ticket price? We didn't ask people to fill in, to actually write their average ticket price. We gave them a range, and again, through some mathematical contortions, we came out with an average ticket price of $623 that was weighted according to this sample. And you can see the distribution. And actually, these were actually the ranges that people were confronted with. So in case you thought these ranges were too broad, actually this is what respondents were faced with. So although they're ranges, they're not too broad. Then we asked, how much did you spend on your programming for the whole year? So again, looking at ranges and then taking midpoints, we came up with an average of $214,000 for the year. Now, if you think about that previous slide, which had an average attendance per year calculation, what this equates to is about $1.32 per head, or around 21% of the box office, or 21% of ATP. So that feels about right. That's sort of where we expected it to land. Then we asked about marketing. And now this is what's really interesting. There's a couple of ways to look at this. We asked, not counting your theater's or own organization's website or social media, because everyone does that. Does your organization market the content shown at your theater using paid external media? This is a really interesting result. The positive way of saying this is a solid 2/3 do. The negative approach is say, yeah, but a third aren't doing anything. And now, that's not to say that their organization isn't doing something. There are lots of cases where the host museum is spending real money, lots of money, and getting people in the door, and the theater is one of many things to do. So then we asked, all right, on a per head basis, how much of those who are actually spending money on marketing, on a per head basis, how much are you spending? And weighted average, it comes out to about $1. Now, be careful with that number. That dollar is of people who are spending real money, or some money at least, on marketing. If I were to weight this with those who pay $0, then it's probably down around 70 cents. At the dollar rate, it would be around, I'll just leave that alone. Anyway, I made that point. Yeah, I'd say, all right, I'll leave that one alone. Okay. We'll get into that in the panel. And that's just to show the different ranges that people actually saw when they did the questionnaire. Then we asked what the underlying trend was for the theater's attendance in the last 3 years. And, this confirms the trend that is unfortunately well known. It's not, generally speaking, a growth business for most theaters. Some are growing. Some are holding their own. And by the way, I looked at the flat versus dome, and actually the decreasing trend skewed to flat screens. However, the host institutions are generally doing better than their own giant screen theater. As you can see from that slide, if you compare that one with the one before it. What type of screen do you have? This was a check to make sure we had a pretty good representation. The 60-40 split is roughly what of our sample is reflective of the industry at large. And we asked the domes. Now, be careful. This isn't a huge number of people who responded, unfortunately. But of those who responded, we asked if they thought that giant screen producers are delivering content that looks good, technically speaking, on your dome. We have a 60-40 split between the levels of satisfaction versus levels of dissatisfaction. What is the setting of your theater? This is kind of obvious. It's dominated by institutions, 95% of our sample, actually, which is a little bit heavier than the market at large. We asked about what systems they have. Now, keep in mind this is a year ago, and actually in the last year, a lot of, especially flat screen theaters, have moved to digital. About a year ago, about 7 in 10 were still film, or had film. Some people have multiple systems. Of course, that result was, it's that high because of domes. And in the last year, like I say, there's been quite a number of flat screens that have converted. So this is moving. Obviously, that percentage is going down that are still film. Do you have 3D projection capability? That's kind of obvious. If you have 60% of your sample are flat screen, most flat screens have 3D. Which region of your theater? This is just, again, to check that we're kind of representative of the market. Well, we're close to the splits for the GSCA, but understand that GSCA theater members overweight to US and Canada. And so there's a bit of a built-in bias there. There's actually, the marketplace actually has much higher than 18% of the giant screen theaters worldwide are outside of North America. But anyway, this does kind of mirror the Giant Screen Cinema Association member composition. Now, finally, I want to circle back to the audience research survey, and I find this really useful. I actually refer to this several times. I point clients, my producer clients, to this quite often. And if you're new to the business, perhaps this is one of the most interesting and valuable results that you can use today and maybe you can use with prospective sponsors. So the profile of a giant screen audience member, they're highly educated, they have above average income, their life stage, with the highest segment or the largest segment are families with kids. I think we all kind of know that, but now there's the number, almost 4 in 10. The next biggest are boomers and older. They're tech savvy, and their consumption of entertainment outside of the home is at a pretty high level, 2/3 paying for out-of-home entertainment at least once a month. So I would encourage you to use this, and again, dive into that survey report. There's really a treasure trove of information there. All right, so if anyone picks this up later, you'll see a whole bunch of credits. Those people deserve a lot of thanks for all their work, and there you have it. Okay, and then, as I said, we've got all the verbatim comments. You can come back to that later, because otherwise that's an eye test, and we're not going to do that right now. Okay, all right. So let's get to potential funding sources. Yes, James? Is your question about the model? No, we're going to do, sorry, I should have been clear. I'll do questions about the model in the 4 segment when we have our panel. Okay, but thanks for clarifying. It's good. All right, so potential funding sources. We have 3 individuals who will each take turns giving a brief overview to funding films from their standpoint. And you can see who we have here. I'm delighted that we have these 3 people. We actually have Valentine is not actually here today, but we've recorded her answers to the questions that we had for her last week, and I'll be playing that back shortly. Now, what we will do in this section, James and everyone else, each person is going to, well, the 2 people here in person are going to give a short overview of their of the money that they manage for film funding, and then we'll have a brief Q&A for each of them. We'll have about 10 minutes per speaker on this slide. So Let me first ask Di Roberts, Senior Production Executive of the IMAX Original Documentary Film Fund, to come to the podium. Di.
Thanks, Paul. I'll just survey the room to see who I don't want to insult this morning. I'll leave that to Jonathan for when he comes up. First of all, I want to say thank you to the GSCA for inviting me to speak. And I'd really like to say thank you to David Keeley, Greg McGilvery, and Stephen Lowe for making it possible for us to see those films this morning, because they really do, amongst other films that some of our producers make, hold the gold standard for this format. And I think, our industry relies and depends on, its future depends on us making good films. That's the bottom line. We don't make good films, we lose our audience. So I think Paul has pointed that out in his presentation as well. We need to maintain our standards. I'll give you a bit of background on me. I consider myself sort of a newcomer, really, because I've only been in this business for 26 years. And the first 4 films I made were very diverse, from the first 90-minute film on one of the biggest rock bands in the world, the Rolling Stones, going to a 6-month trip to the sub-Antarctic, to spending a time in Kuwait after the war, and then doing the first sort of natural history film based on Attenborough's work, which was Secrets of Life on Earth, in 57 locations around the world. And I mention those because it sort of makes up my background and why I think I can help filmmakers to bring their vision to life and help them with their funding. Only a handful of producers, and some of them are in this room today, make more than one film. That's just a reality. And they are incredibly tenacious. After making those first 4 films with IMAX, I ended up going out into the independent world, but working with one of the most tenacious producers I know, which is Jonathan. And we made a few films together, with me watching him, tirelessly raising money for this industry and the films that we make. The early films I made for IMAX were in what I'd call the heyday of sponsorship as well. So we were making, it was the days before 3D, we were making 2D films for budgets in excess of $6 million, and we were also, they were mainly sponsorship dollars. So I found that it was not until you get to your 3rd film you really know how to work with the potential and power of this medium. So getting on to the Film Fund, the IMAX Original Content Documentary Film Fund was launched 18 months ago. It's a $50 million fund. Our partners are the Knights of Columbus. And to date, we've had over 200 submissions. Our goal is to fund and release 2 films a year. The first film coming out from the fund is Terrence Malick's Voyage of Time, which you've seen. For those of you who saw the trailer, that film will be released in 2D. It's in full 1:4:3 laser, film, and 1:9 xenon. We have another 3 films about to start. Pandas, we've already started filming. Moby Duck is under in development, and a film on Iron Man. There are several more that we have in early stages of development that are a little too early to talk about. The fund has a theatre advisory committee made up of 10 of the IMAX theatres across North America, and we have regular meetings with them, either in person or by phone, and we discuss the submissions that are shortlisted internally at IMAX, really value their opinions and their thoughts on the direction of the films that we're choosing and that we're going in for the format. The process is initially you contact me, or you submit your treatment, and I can provide you with a submission form that is a release for us to review the product. We like to see a chain of title, a budget top sheet, a schedule, and a PowerPoint presentation or some sort of AV supporting materials. We have an initial review process internally. There are 7 of us internally within IMAX Corporation that review the submissions, and we then whittle it down to maybe 4 or 5 that go before our Greenlight Committee meetings, which happen 4 times a year, either in New York or Los Angeles, where the producers and their team are invited to present in person. The format of that is you are given 15 minutes to present your project, a 15-minute question and answer session, and then 15 minutes for the IMAX team, the IMAX Greenlight Committee, to discuss the project with the producers having left the room. Recently, we signed a deal, which most of you probably know about, with Discovery, and this is going to bring an awful lot of support to promoting the films in your individual marketplaces. So I'm very encouraged about having that extra support out there. I'd like to open the room up to some questions now that I may be able to answer for you.
And there is a live mic stand over there on the floor, over in the middle. Anybody?
Yes, the gentleman in the back.
I'm a new baby here. And I have 14 documentaries that I've made already, but they're HD.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them will be released in theaters, and we're approaching Netflix and things. But I want to make, right off the bat, I want to make two IMAX films. And it's going to incorporate mainly photographs. Okay? Full color photographs of the movie. It's called 100 Miles from the Moon, and we're going to be zooming in and panning and tilting and doing this kind of thing. For the funding of this type of film, okay, IMAX will fund. What would you like to propose?
We look at proposals and are able to fund up to 50%. We're able to provide up to 50% of funding. As Paul said earlier, these films range widely in their budgets, from 2 million to 10 million. Realistically, though, for a 3D film, I think a realistic budget to be able to recoup cost is between the $6 and $8 million range. But we will look at up to 50% of funding, but it depends on the submission and the materials and the potential we feel the film has.
Okay, and you're located in Santa Monica?
Yes.
Thank you.
I have more of a sort of historical question about sort of funding sources. I mean, north of Superior, I grew up in Toronto, so the Cinesphere is close to my heart. And north of Superior kind of reminded me so much of sort of a Canadian National Film Board style. And I was just curious about whether you guys have ever, and obviously the Rocky Mountain, very much Canadian historical. Has there ever been a partnership with the National Film Board or Telefilm? Just curious.
There have been a lot of IMAX films made with the National Film Board, and with Telefilm, I don't think we've had anything.
Telefilm doesn't allow films under 75 minutes, so they're not eligible for funding from Telefilm.
Anybody else?
Well, is there any National Film Board partnerships? Are those still possible?
Yes, they're still possible, but don't hold your breath.
Yeah, it's slim now.
You said that the goal is to have 2 films per year. When do you expect to start reaching that goal? There'll be one film this year?
We've already started it this year. I mean, we are releasing A Beautiful Planet, although that wasn't a fun film.
Okay.
That wasn't a fun film, but there'll be 2 documentaries from IMAX Corporation this year. Beautiful Planet, April 29th, and Terrence Malick's Voyage of Time on the 7th of October.
And so are they then expecting 2 film funded films next year as well?
Yes, we are, yes. And, continually since sustaining itself, we hope to go on for the foreseeable future.
Is the film fund equity or non-equity?
The film fund is equity, and the distribution fee from IMAX is 10%.
10%. And how much creative control does IMAX choose to have over the projects they select?
We partner with producers that want to take. We give very liberal creative control to the partners. We come in and look. We do have final cut, but obviously all the milestones are recognised. And if you haven't recognised you have a problem when you're at that stage, then you're not doing your job.
And is there an ROI that you require on the 50%?
No.
Okay, that's great, Di. Thank you so much. I'm sure if there are other questions, Di's still at the conference.
I'm here, yes, please.
And thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to set up for the interview with Valentine Cass. I wasn't going to pretend that I've got her patched in, but you would have figured it out that she's not here, so I'm not going to do that. Okay. Just bear with me. Okay, so again, Valentine Cass, for those of you who don't know her, she's the program director at the National Science Foundation. She couldn't attend the conference. She sends her best. She will be at the September conference. So we did the next best thing. We recorded an interview with her. I interviewed her last week. We recorded it. And so I'm going to read the questions that I asked of her, and you will hear her answers as recorded over a couple of sessions last week. So don't look at the slide. There's too much inside baseball there. You can see how many edits it took to get to where we needed to be. All right. So, Valentine, let's first talk about the history of the National Science Foundation's significant involvement with giant screen films. How long has the NSF been doing this? How many theaters has the NSF supported? And what has been the total dollar investment over the years?
NSF has supported large format films almost for a quarter of a century. The first one being Tropical Rainforest in 1992. Since then, NSF has made major investments in about 30 films, and of course, as well as their accompanying educational materials and outreach efforts. And this represents about a $50 million investment.
What are the specific NSF programs that have financed large format films?
The program's name that funds large format films is the Advancing Informal STEM Learning Program, what we call AZLE. STEM meaning science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. For those who've been around in the industry longer, the program's older name was Informal Science Education.
And what is the dollar range of awards?
We have different project types with different project award amounts. For a project that is innovations in development, which would be a production type grant, the amount ranges from $500,000 to up to $3 million. For exploratory pathways projects, which are what the name implies, more of a planning type project, the award amount is up to $300,000.
And you average about one NSF award for a giant screen film each year?
That's been our average, but there's certainly no guarantee that we would fund one award per year. It all depends on what proposals we receive and how competitive they are, and how the program officers of the program as a whole feel that we need to balance our portfolio.
And what are some examples of films that have received NSF support?
Audience favorites include Everest, The Human Body, Forces of Nature, and more recently, Mysteries of the Unseen World, Tornado Alley, and Flight of the Butterflies. In addition to the projects which have actually received grant funds, the NSF Polar Program provided priceless logistic support for Antarctica, which was released back in 1991. Well, let me tell you about the last...
Oh, got ahead of me, Valentine. What was the most recent award for a large format film? Now, Valentine.
Two awards, which are both currently either in the fundraising stage or in the production stage. The first being Amazon Adventure, which is a project from SK Films, Jonathan Barker, and that award was submitted to NSF by the Pacific Science Center, with Diane Carlson as the principal investigator. And the second is Secrets of the Universe, a K2 communications project in association with Stephen Lowe, and that project is about the Large Hadron Collider.
What is the timing cycle for NSF solicitations, and how long does it take from submission of a funding request to a decision?
The next deadline date for submission is November 8th of this year, and it takes at least 6 months between the time of submission and the time of an award is made.
If the producer is a for-profit entity, must they work with a not-for-profit organization whose representative becomes the principal investigator, and the NSF award is actually paid to the producer's not-for-profit partner, which becomes the fiscal sponsor?
The organization applying to NSF does not have to be a nonprofit organization, but one of the criteria, it must be a U.S.-based organization. Although the applicant can then also work with a non-U.S. production partner.
For a filmmaker to improve their prospects of a successful award request, do you recommend they hire a grant writer?
Writing an NSF proposal, no doubt, takes a lot of work. It's not for the faint of heart. So if one is not familiar with the NSF, it certainly can be very helpful, albeit costly, to hire a grant writer who can help you navigate the submission process. With that said, I would also say even having an experienced grant writer on your team is no guarantee that you'll get an award. A good grant writer can help you understand what you need to pull together all the components of a project, but the grant writer is not the one who writes your treatment or develops your budget or hires your evaluator, etc. So in other words, the grant writer is not a magician. You've got to do your own homework.
What are some of the attributes of a successful grant request?
A successful grant proposal is one that responds thoughtfully to the AZL solicitation. We are looking for projects that push the envelope. The proposal must describe clearly what the intellectual merit and broader impact of the project will be. How is the project innovative? How is the project building new collaborations? What is the impact on the target audience, and how is it building knowledge for the ISE field writ large? Will the project have strategic impact? Are all the components of the project thoughtfully put together and well justified? Does it have a good management team and a reasonable budget, etc.? Good proposals also address directly any challenges the project might face. So remember, all proposals are read by a panel of peer reviewers, and reviewers have lots of proposals to read. So top proposals are the ones that are a pleasure to read because they propose an exciting, well-thought-through project with all the ducks in a row. I like to say the best proposals, quote-unquote, sing.
And how about those which were not successful? What are their typical shortcomings?
Typical shortcomings. Well, first and foremost, all proposals that do not adhere to the basic NSF submission requirements, for instance, surpass the 15-page limit for the project description, are returned without review. So you first must pass that compliance check. And the proposals which review poorly are the ones that do not address the solicitation priorities that I just talked about and are poorly written. They don't have adequate documentation. They convey a trust me, I'm great attitude and may be full of grammatical and spelling mistakes. And of course, the bottom line is that the science content must be spot on. I've had instances where my media panel really liked a project and I've sent it out for additional reviews by content experts. And the content experts have come back with reviews that criticize the science. This then is a non-starter. We, after all, are the NSF, so the science must be well vetted.
What other advice do you have for the filmmakers who have never pursued NSF funding before?
Well, I would say that you should talk with colleagues who are at the symposium who have received NSF grants and ask them, what advice they can share. You can certainly read the abstracts of past awards, which all can be found on the NSF website, nsf.gov. I would definitely recommend people to read the summative evaluation reports of past projects, which can be found on the CASE website, CASE being the Center for the Advancement of Informal Science Education. So, and that website is www.informalscience.org. And as I always say, is read the ASIL solicitation really carefully. I know it's not great bedtime reading, but you really need to think about what is being called for and how your project responds to that solicitation. So the NSF solicitation, the current one is NSF 15-593. And if you just Google NSF 15593, you'll come up with the ASIL solicitation. And lastly, once you've read the solicitation, feel free to contact me, your friendly program officer, and I'm at vcas@nsf.gov.
Thank you for all the information, Valentine. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to say to our audience here today?
I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but I look forward to hearing about your creative ideas and seeing you all at the GSCA conference in September. Thanks.
That's it. Okay.
NSF has supported large format films almost for a quarter of a century.
And we could hear it again,
The
too.
first
Really
one
nice.
being Tropical Rainforest in 1992. NSF has supported large format films since then, almost for a quarter of a century. The first one being Tropical Rainforest in 1992.
Yeah,
Since then, NSF has made major investments in about 30 films, and of course, as well as their accompanying educational materials and outreach
Somebody wanna help me?
efforts. And this represents about a $50 million.
There it is. It was so good right to that very end, but I had to give you something to laugh about, so anyway. Okay. All right. All right, so zip through. We're going to have one more. We're going to have Robin Doty join us. Robin, you might as well start heading up here. And by the way, there's Valentine, for those of you who haven't met her, and her email address is there. And now we're going to have Robin Doty, Museum of Science Boston, and he's also the vice chair of the Giant Dome Theater Consortium. Robin, take it over.
Thank you. Well, if Di is a newcomer, I'm an infant. I've only been in this industry since 2007 with a television career prior to that. So I'm learning as we go. Now, just so you know, I hope everyone in here has seen the films we saw this morning. I really consider those as premier films, and I actually think Rocky Mountain Express is a bit of a masterpiece. A lot to be learned from looking at those. Has little to do with the domes directly, but it's all about good storytelling. And I think we saw up here on the list, storytelling's pretty damn high. It's a big factor for us, too. So what's true of flat screens is true of domes. Okay, what is the GDCC? I managed to say that right for once. Okay, we are an outgrowth of the original Museum Film Network under Jeffrey Kirsch's administration. Hey, Jeff. We transformed into the Giant Dome Theater Consortium. So some of the dome theaters pulled away, created their own group. Now, one of the things that was important for us is for us to have any sway in the industry at all, we had to have some teeth. And teeth in this industry is money. So we do have money. So we have money to invest in films. First off, you should know that there are 7 major dome theaters from across the country involved. The Discovery Place in Charlotte with Joni Phillips. We have Dave Dazinski in Cincinnati. Andrea Ingram and Gil Perez in Chicago, Museum of Science and Industry. San Diego, Craig Blower, and currently represented with Wendy Grant. Jackie Mollet, who I think most of you know from the St. Louis Science Center. Mike Day, a force of his own kind out of Minnesota at the Science Museum of Minnesota. And if you've ever met Mike, you will know exactly who I'm talking about. And then there's me, Robin Doty from the Museum of Science in Boston. We all came together because we wanted to make sure there were films to put in our theaters and that filmmakers created films that we felt were well suited to our theaters. No dispersion, nothing wrong with flat screens, but we live in a dome world, so we have to make sure there's films to fit it. And there are certain rules and regulations, technical standards, et cetera, which we can talk about more. But it is one of the chief principles for us. The technical standards for domes are pretty stringent. And if you don't listen to them, the film is not going to look good. If it doesn't look good and doesn't play well on my screen, I'm not going to book it if there's any way around it. I want a screen. I want a film that looks good and have patrons come out of the theater and say it's fantastic. It's crucial to me. Now, again, echoing back on what we saw this morning, I learned a lot this morning. I had never seen North of Superior. I think there's a chance that we might want to look backwards and learn from what we saw this morning in terms of informing the giant screen industry and the kinds of things that we see on our screens. I was very happy to see that. I have to tell you, I really loved laughing with those people in that film this morning. It was very genuine, and I laughed with them. I want more of that. We want more of that, on our screens. And I have to tell you, I'm a sucker for Rocky Mountain Express. I cry every time. I really love the film. It is fantastic. Again, it's attention to timing, it's attention to music, when to use it, all these things. There are factors for us, again, in the domes. I'm supposed to talk about domes, so I'll get back to that. So, who are we? How much money are we talking about? First off, the Giant Dome Theater Consortium is not seed money. We do not put money into a film to make it happen. What we do is put money into a film to make it actually get completed. Having said that, we generally contribute anywhere from $500,000, $500,000, to $1 million. We'll invest that in a film. That's serious money from our vantage point. We'll invest it in a film if the filmmakers are really going to be serious about listening to us, about those technical standards, about meeting the requirements for a dome. The other part of the equation is not just money-oriented. You've got 7 major theaters in 7 major markets talking to you about your film and putting it in their theaters. That's worth a heck of a lot, beyond just the money from support out of the Giant Dome Theater Consortium. So we're talking about a lot of weight, we think. Are we open to new members? People ask me that all the time. Absolutely. We could use another 3 members in the group. Every cent we get out of our investments that we get back through the deals we make goes directly back into our coffers to fund more films. We see that as crucial. We can't expect there to be films if we're not doing our part to help make them possible. So again, 100% minus a few expenses. Every now and then Dave might need to make a trip out west to twist Greg McGilvery's arm over something or another, or whomever. And that's what we do spend. But the rest of it totally goes towards funding new films. Very crucial to us. And as far as, let's see, as far as becoming members, again, you can always address anybody in the group, approach any of us. Now, we don't have near the hoops and hurdles to jump over that the NSF has. You submit an idea to us, you talk to us, we'll talk to you. We don't have a whole stack of standards, a whole stack of reports and other things you have to fill out. You need to talk to us. We want a conversation to go on. I'll tell you right now, we're having a conversation with Jonathan Bird down here about his Ancient Caves film. Now, he's expressed a dome-only idea for that, and I suspect the distributors will twist his arm to make sure there's a flat-screen version, but that's not really the point. He started a dialogue with us over a year ago. We're totally open to that. We want to talk to you about how you're going to make your film and what role our involvement takes in making that film possible. Again, bottom line, good film, good technical quality, good storytelling. We'll tell you from our markets. We're, again, talking about our knowledge from our markets. In regards to the technical issue, we are aware your image of us is 1570 or nothing else, okay? No, we're more flexible than that. We understand the industry's changing. We understand the world is changing. We're going to twist your arm big time to make some 1570 part of it, because guess what? The domes are still film, and they will remain film for a while yet. Until somebody comes up with the magic sauce to make it possible, domes will be film, all right? Films are a big deal to us, so if you can shoot 1570 as much as possible, particularly for those wow shots we talk about, we love you, okay? So keep that in there. But, 4K Red Dragons, they're okay. So, again, how do you get started? Again, talk to us, all right? It really is a group of 7 theaters sitting down with anything you tell us. We use a tracking form, by the way, and every other question is this going to look good on a dome? All right, so that's our sort of status. So if you're interested in knowing more about us, you talk to me, you talk to Jackie, you talk to Mike, whomever, and we'll start a discussion with you. We want your film to be dome-friendly. We need films, and we'll work with you in whatever way we can, and we'll use our money as constructively as possible to make that happen. All right? Great. Any questions? Jeffrey. Fair enough. We make deals. Our deals are as varied as the people we work with. I will tell you that we have invested in 3 films to date, and every one of those deals is different. Tornado Alley was the first film that we invested in. Journey to Space has been another, and the National Parks film from Gilvery Freeman, it was another. Some of these arrangements are equity-oriented. Some of them are sort of pre-release nature, having to do with fees, agreed-upon fee structure, and print costs. So we are going to find a way to work with you if we think it's going to fit. So yes, we run the gamut. We will talk to you about custom arrangements, and I can assure you, Dave Dazinski can talk a little bit more about the financial side of things, and certainly, you're going to want to talk to him and Mike Day at some point in time. But nonetheless, we're totally flexible, totally open. We want to see good dome films. That's our bottom line.
Great. That's great, Robin. Thank you so much. I'm sure there may be other questions, but in the interest of time, look for Robin afterwards. And Robin, thank you so much for contributing this. Okay, so I'd like to ask. Yes, James?
In one of your first spreadsheets,
Yeah.
you had a number of bookings.
Uh-huh.
Is that counting separate theaters only, or is that counting multiple bookings at the same theater as multiple bookings?
It's,
If the film gets booked, runs twice, say, 2 years apart, at the same theater, are those two
counted as one.
counted as one?
Counted as one. It was, I meant to say average license per theater, not necessarily average dollars per license, because I realize there can be successive licenses.
You have a number for bookings, so, okay, so
If I-
175 there for the.
That really meant theaters. It could be multiple licenses for one theater, but they only count once. Okay? Great. Okay, good. Well, I could have handled that earlier. All right, so now I'm going to ask our panel to join us. I'm very pleased to have 3 gentlemen. You can join us here at the dais. So we're going to have Stephen Amidros and Jonathan Barker and Pascal Vuong join us for our panel discussion to wrap up this session. So we're going to do this there are basically 2 parts to this. The first part we're going to try to get through quickly to just set the stage, to introduce the films that will be the focus of our conversation here. With Stephen, we'll focus on Hidden Universe, and he may reference his upcoming Search for Life in Space. With Jonathan, we'll focus on Flight of the Butterflies, and he may reference his upcoming Amazon Adventure 2. With Pascal, we'll focus on his D-Day, Normandy 1944, and he may reference C-Rex or his upcoming Icarus's Revenge. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go down the line for each of these questions in order, I guess. So, Jonathan, when was Butterflies released?
2012, October.
Okay, Pascal, D-Day?
April 2014.
Okay. Stephen, Hidden Universe?
June 2013.
Okay. Jonathan, back to you. How long did it take from your very first active development steps to release to giant screen theaters?
I guess
For Butterflies.
sorry to answer that without a single word, but with just one word. But basically, we had the idea in 2004. We started working on it in 2005, and it was released in 2012. So it was basically a little over 7 years from having the idea to releasing the film.
Wow. Pascal, how about D-Day?
More than 3 years.
Okay. Stephen?
In 3 years.
All right, let's talk about the sources of financing for your film. Jonathan, what were the sources of your financing?
Sources of financing for that film were the Mexican government. That was the largest single source. The next largest source was the National Science Foundation. The next largest source was my company and some private investment behind that company. Also together with tax credits from both Canada and the United Kingdom. And then there were two of the largest companies in Mexico, which were corporate sponsors.
And before you leave that, Jonathan, can I just ask you, overall, what was the percentage split of equity versus non-equity?
It was about 25-ish% equity. And some of that equity you might call soft equity, because the way tax credits work is those tax credits, and it's the whole principle behind them, at least the tax credits in both Canada and the United Kingdom, which are very interesting. Those tax credits are the property of the producer, and they represent that producer's equity. So I had a combination of that kind of equity, which is soft in the sense that I had a source to go get that from, which was the governments of Canada and the United Kingdom, and then hard equity being real dollars put up by a private investor.
And I should have asked, I don't know how I missed this, what was the total production budget?
It was around $10.5 million, including the NSF deliverables.
Okay. Pascal, what was your total production budget for D-Day?
It was about 4 million euros.
Okay, so about $4.5 million now?
Yeah.
Somewhere there, okay. And what were the sources of financing?
Mainly CNC, French CNC, Normandy departments and region. And we had some individuals, US, brought by Tom Rocco.
Right. Oh, excellent. And overall, what was the percentage split of equity versus non-equity, roughly?
We didn't do the math, but I guess it's about 40%.
40% equity? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, Stephen, what was your total production budget?
Ours is about 3.5 trillion Australian dollars. I think that's about 6 million US.
Okay. And the sources of financing for Hidden Universe?
We had a university which actually put in the equivalent of around $4 to $5 million. The production company actually put in 3.2 million. State funding about 200,000. Then a distribution minimum distribution guarantee, okay, about 200 as well.
And the split of your equity versus non-equity?
Basically 45, 55, 45 for the actual cash, I suppose, to the in kind.
Jonathan, we'll come back to you. What content did you create before getting any external funding? Whether it's scripts or teaser trailers, what have you.
Well, the first, we decided that we were going to go for NSF funding, and so our strategy basically was put that in place and then go from there. So in order to do that, we created really a script, although it was called a treatment, but it was a very lengthy and detailed treatment. And we just supplemented that with visual material, but just from taking trips to the monarch reserves in Mexico and taking some beautiful pictures, but that was really it. Script and some photographs.
Pascal, how about you? What did you create for fundraising?
Everything we could do with our own money. We made a teaser, we made so many documentation about D-Day and the Normandy landings, the Battle of Normandy, etc. So I cannot count the whole amount of things we created before to obtain the first funds.
Okay. Stephen, how about you?
We created a teaser and a short treatment. I'd say that the teaser really was to demonstrate that we knew what giant screen was about, or the differentiation between giant screen and television.
Right.
That was the important part of the teaser.
Great. Now, I'm going to ask this of Stephen and Pascal. So Pascal, because Jonathan has a distribution department, but for Stephen and Pascal, who didn't have their own distribution group, I'll ask, at what point in your development process did you secure a distributor? Pascal?
I think the distributor, they just took the risk when most of the things was done. So it was maybe in the middle of the production.
Middle of production, okay. Stephen?
I'd love to say we chose the distributor, but to be quite honest, the distributor chose us. There are a lot of great distributors in Giant Screen, and they're all open to talking to everybody. They all have a lot to give, so I talk to everybody. We settled with people who are filmmakers as well, because they had a great deal of knowledge they could impart to us, because we came to learn. So that's all I can say on that one.
And at what time? And when was it?
That was prior to financing being completed, so prior to production even starting.
Okay, great. All right, so let's switch to results and advice for your filmmaking peers in the audience. And actually, to set the stage there, let's just check in with you on some highlights of its performance so far. If you could mention the aggregate gross box office and maybe the number of theatrical licenses. Jonathan, with Butterflies, what can you report about it?
What I can report is about, I'll report where we are expecting to end up, and we are quite far along in that, is the way I'll put it. We're expecting to end up at about 200 leases, and we're expecting to end up over $30 million.
Pascal?
I think it's we're about 50 theaters so far.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
Box office to date? Aggregate gross box office?
$8 million.
Okay, all right. Stephen?
I think we're around somewhere between 39 and 40 theatres. Gross, do you want that in Australian sort of currency, or would you like
It'll sound better. Sound a lot better.
Probably about somewhere between 8 and 10 at the moment.
Great.
Yeah.
Corporate and government agency sponsorships or grants. So, Jonathan, I'm going to direct this to you. I've seen the end credits of Butterflies. It's quite the wallpaper. You have a lot of sponsors. How did you keep them all happy? If you could address the fulfillment aspect.
Well, first of all, I can tell you that the reason why you see so many logos is because our largest sponsor was the Mexican government, but that is an easy thing to say. It's only 2 words, Mexican government. But it's a little more complicated than that, because for reasons I'll never totally understand, the money came from multiple agencies of the Mexican government, and in 2 of those cases, they each insisted on having 3 logos on the film. But you know, when they're giving you a very substantial amount of money, you smile politely and say yes. So, sorry, anything
And
else?
how did you manage all that? So I guess it was maybe it was an art decision.
Yeah, the managing of the logos. Well, it wasn't the worst I've had.
Yeah.
The worst I've had was on the helicopter film I made called Straight Up with Di, and there were 17 on that one, and it was pretty intense. And the interesting thing, though, is a lesson I learned from Graham Ferguson. When I used to run the film business for IMAX, and the first meeting I went to, Graham asked me to go to NASA, sorry, just take 1 minute for this, to go to the Air and Space Museum, rather, to look at a cut of a film we were making at the time, Destiny in Space. And he wanted me to have this experience of dealing with multiple parties around a table on one of these films. And we went into the boardroom of the Air and Space Museum. There were 26 people around the table. Those 26 people were from NASA and Lockheed and from the Air and Space Museum. And we spent 2 hours discussing one shot. And in that discussion, there was quite a bit of disagreement between all of these different parties around the table. And what I learned from Graham is that what you do is you cross your fingers like this, you close your eyes, and you wait for them to finish, and then you do whatever you want.
That's great. Pascal, did you want to add to that?
No.
No? Okay, that's fine. Right, that's fine. We can move on. All right. So you've all done well to leverage multinational tax treaties and tax credit financing. What are the big lessons here? And is one of them that you have an advisor on your team to help you navigate this issue? Now, I know, Jonathan, you've got your own career experience in this, but maybe you could address it first.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I would distinguish between the things like the National Science Foundation. You heard Valentine say, yes, we've applied to the National Science Foundation twice, and we did it differently the two times. The first time we hired a consultant. It was very expensive, but we succeeded. The second time we had the pleasure of working with Diane here in the back, and her team did the heavy lifting on that application, together with us providing a lot of materials to support that. And so that was handled by the Pacific Science Center. So in that sense, you certainly, whichever way you go, you should certainly have a very experienced person or team handling the application. And if you just do it yourself, you're probably not, I mean, I would say it'd be very surprising to make it by doing it yourself. Second thing is, in terms of incentives like government incentives and tax credits, divide those into governments who do something because they want to help, they have a reason to support your film directly. That was the experience I had with the Mexican government. So that was treating them like a corporate sponsor. So I went to them as a sponsor, and there wasn't a budget they took it from for this. They just created the budget because they liked the idea. But on the other hand, if the incentives that exist for these films in various countries, and I can say, you know, for the United States, for Americans in the audience, it might be a little difficult to understand this concept, but those of us who live outside of the United States, we live in Canada, and Pascal in France, and Stephen in Australia, you know, we have government incentive systems like tax credits are a good example. The purpose of those is to fight the evil American empire. And what this allows is, these subsidies allow, is to combine, we have treaties between these countries. So in all three of these countries, Canada has treaties with both of these countries and about 50 other countries around the world, which allow a film, it has to be a national film to get the incentive. So we have to have a Canadian film to get the Canadian incentive. But we can be a Canadian film and a French film and an Australian film by making a deal together where we're all three producing the film, and we produce it in accordance with the rules of our treaties, and that allows us to access the benefits in all three countries. So it's a very useful thing to be aware of. If you're an American producer, it's kind of tough to take advantage of that. If you're an American company interested in backing films, so for instance, Amazon Adventure is a Canada, UK, Brazil co-production, and the largest amount of financing is coming from 3 American organizations. And that's not a problem. One of them it produces, but they're just not producing this particular film, which is the Howard Hughes Tangle Bank Studios. So there's many different ways to do it, but just to be aware of these programs, they can be very useful and provide real money for these shows.
Stephen, you want to add anything to the tax credit and your experience? And could you maybe address whether or not you had a specialist, a financial expert on your team to help you navigate what you need to do in your country in Australia?
No, we actually, just to answer Paul's question, no, we didn't have a specialist in there.
Okay.
I think everybody in the Australian film industry quickly becomes their own specialist in that area. We've got a very simple tax credit system that works 20% rebate on Australian content or Australian factor within your production for television, and 40% for film. We've got, as Jonathan said before, we've got a minimum duration for film as well, being 45 minutes. Anything under that's not considered film. So, but everybody's fairly skilled and fairly proficient at filling in those particular forms. It goes to the ATO, to the Australian Tax Office, and they tick the boxes. You need to be very blunt, cover your ass, because they don't tick all the boxes and give you 100% back. So you need to manage your risk very well. Don't expose yourself too much on those sorts of things, and also work it out in your waterfall that you're going to be able to cover yourself for those sort of credits.
Great. Maybe we could switch over to another element of all this that seems to be a pretty important aspect of your development efforts, and I think you've all gone through it. I'm curious if you could address, and we've got a lot of theater people here in this audience too, in what ways, and I guess for what purpose, should a producer reach out to theaters during the development phase? Pascal, do you want to take that first?
No. But I'd like to say that opposite to Jonathan, maybe because I'm French, the people I meet for funds don't know even the word of large format or IMAX or giant screen. So I spend a huge amount of time to explain what it is, how it works. Yes, no, I'm not an IMAX guy. IMAX doesn't help me so far. So it's very hard to convince people to get involved in our production because they just don't know how it works, how they will recoup their investment. I have to explain everything, and it's time to. I think for the GSCA to develop communication and marketing of our industry.
That's a really good point on industry development, so thank you for raising it. Maybe Jonathan or Stephen, Jonathan, could you talk about how you've involved theaters and what you recommend that way?
Well, I think the first thing is if you're new to the business, it really is important to get to understand the market a bit and talking to theater, there's no point coming, and we've seen at least one example of it this week, no names or projects mentioned, but I've talked to a number of theaters about the projects in development and in production, and there's a couple of items in there where theaters said, how did it ever enter their minds to bring this forward as a potential project? And there's nothing wrong with the project at all. It's just what's wrong is for the market. So I really highly recommend new producers to make sure you either have a distribution partner or a production partner who's already experienced, or that you communicate directly with theaters to get a read on what it is you want to do, because there are just simply ideas that are not suitable for the market. I mean, we are a family market, all the things that you went through, which really describe our market. There's no point presenting things for that market that aren't suitable for it. So, and of course the theaters, at a conference, the theaters are here, they're all sprinkled all through this room, talk to them, and talk to them about what is suitable for the market. That's the key. And in terms of what we've done, because I've been in the business a long time, have the relationships, but for instance on Amazon Adventure, it's been absolutely terrific to have Diana at the Pacific Science Center, one of the absolute leaders in the business, as a partner on the project. So every step of the way, every iteration of the script, every marketing idea, all of it is being done in consultation with a theater that has been very, very successful for a very long time. Very helpful.
That's great. I'm conscious of our time, and I know there's a lot to do, but let me, we're going to have to wrap up, I guess. And I guess what I'll do is I'll just ask each of you to succinctly, if you could say there was one, maybe two things that are really the most important piece of advice you could give to a new producer who's coming into this medium. Stephen, you want to lead off?
Let me think about that, Jonathan.
Okay.
Sorry. Words of wisdom don't come that easy.
Well, I mean, it's hard to make it one thing, but I would say, it's what my partner in SK Films, the late Bob Kerr, who was one of the three founders of IMAX, always said from the day I arrived at that company and then since is, why IMAX? Why giant screen? Like, ask yourself that question when you're conceiving of a project. And it's getting harder these days it's getting, put it this way, it's getting easier to slip into the wrong answer to that question because of the advent of digital and the apparent ease of making these films. So it's easy to think, wow, I'll just bang out an IMAX version of this great idea. Bad idea. So really pay attention to A, the format, and B, the market, because it's very particular, and you're going to fall on your face if you don't pay attention to those things.
Great point. Stephen, you want to go next?
Yeah, mine would be find yourself a mentor. Find yourself somebody in this industry who you respect and listen to them.
Great. Pascal?
I do agree. I think, thanks to Christian Fry here, the GSCA released a document of recommendation, and I think it's very important to read this before investing so much time and money.
You're talking about the workflow document?
Yeah. And by the way, I think people, before I started in this industry, I looked, maybe I've seen dozens of IMAX large format documentaries on giant screen. So I get my own idea to how to make it. It's very important to get the rules of this format in terms of framing, rhythm, topic, etc. And I think if we need to increase the number of viewers, because we need to get more money. Everyone here needs to earn more money. Theaters, distributors, producers, everyone. We need to have the best quality possible with our new tools.
Okay, that's great. Well, thank you so much. You know, in the interest of time, we could keep going, and this has been great. We know we will be around through the rest of the day for sure. I'll be here through the end of the day tomorrow. If there's anything you want to circle back with me on, especially what I presented. But I want to thank all of our presenters and panelists. They were wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, audience, for your attention.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, okay.